Liberal Viewer presents.
So, welcome to the November 22nd edition of Liberal Viewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I picked out 31 of the weekend's best clips for what I think should be a really good show for you all tonight. As usual, my clips come mostly from the Sunday morning news analysis shows on the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States. You'll notice for this show I've done some big hardware upgrades. I'm using a different camera, you may notice. For the purpose of this show, I talked last week about how I had some hardware problems. I had to buy this thing so that I can use this different camera. I had to do this, buy this thing, and so I've done almost $1,000 worth of upgrades, which if you noticed last week, even though I was having all those hardware problems, that video did not end up being monetized because of the sensitive topic. So I just wanted to, at the beginning of the show, usually I talk about this at the end of the show, but at the beginning of the show, if you want to help support my YouTube channel, if you want me to be able to keep doing these clip roundups and my edited, produced videos, even though YouTube doesn't seem to want to give me advertising revenue when I talk about certain sensitive topics, I put a Patreon link down in the video description that you can click on to become one of my monthly patrons. If you are comfortable giving and you enjoy the show that I provide, I hope that you'll become a monthly patron. Or if you click in the left corner of the video here, there's a little eye that will lead you to a direct fan funding donation through the YouTube system. If you want to do a one-time donation, you live in one of those countries. But having made that pitch for supporting the show, since this show will probably also not be monetized for most of the week because of the sensitive topic of ISIS and terrorism, I want to point out what the topics I'll be covering. You can click down in the video description where it says show more, and it'll give a detailed description of all the topics. I will be talking about ISIS and the refugee problem and the controversy about accepting Syrian refugees in the United States. I'll be talking about liberals and Islam, taking some fairly substantial clips from the last show of the season on HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher. I'll have one clip from Saturday Night Live just to show how Saturday Night Live wasn't really funny last night. I'll cover the 2016 presidential campaign, both the Republican side and just a brief mention of the Democratic side of the race, a poll that involves Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders. And I will spend several clips on the Republican side, and especially the xenophobia and anti-Muslim Islamophobia, if I can use that word, which I'll talk about a little later in the show, that's shown up on the Republican side of the race. And I want to start off with one of my political comedy clips, especially since Bill Maher is going to be off for 6 or 7 weeks till January 15th. This is a clip where he starts talking about one of my favorite subjects, the bias on Fox News, and then he talks about the Republicans and their anti-immigrant, anti-refugee problems over in this clip.
News. Has anything contributed more to the stupidity of Americans than Fox News? I don't think so. And I'll give you proof, because I'm sure this comes from Fox News. It was reported today that a majority of Republicans, think unemployment has risen under President Obama. It was 7.6 when he got into office. Now it's 5. Again, Republicans, that second number is lower. Republicans view newspapers like Syrian refugees. Whatever you do, don't let one in your home. Are we doing that thing where we groan first and then decide if we're good people? Don't do that on the last day, because you fucking people are going to make me quit this business. I swear to God. I'm just going to stay on the road where they don't groan, because it's only the assholes who get in for free who groan. Can we get the stick out of our ass, please? It's the last show. What are you groaning about? Christ, I hate liberals.
So Bill Maher's talking about how he hates liberals, and yes, I will acknowledge this box here. During the next clip, I will try to get rid of that box that This is my high definition video camera that has a setting, I guess, where it tries to focus on faces, and I didn't realize that the box focusing on my face was actually showing up on the display you're seeing. So while I'm playing this next clip, I will try to turn off that box that several people have pointed out is showing up on the display here. And having shown that clip about Fox News and about how Republicans are having this problem with immigration, and of course Bill Maher seemed to have this difficulty with liberals that he will come back to over and over again on his show, even though he calls himself a liberal. But having shown the political comedy on refugees and ISIS and the political situation, I now want to show about 3.5-minute clip from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. This is starts off with George Stephanopoulos talking about some poll results. This is the only brief mention of the Democratic side of the race, where they mentioned that Hillary Clinton is still beating Bernie Sanders pretty handily in the national race, but he's gained 9 points. Sorry about that. This is what I get for using new hardware for the first time. I'm trying to get you a higher resolution camera, and it doesn't seem to want to do everything I want it to do. But anyway, I apologize for that. In this next clip, like I said, it's going to be first showing that Bernie Sanders gained 9 points on when Joe Biden decided not to run. He's getting closer to Hillary Clinton, but she still has a fairly commanding lead. That's the one mention of the Democratic side of the race. Then it goes over to the Republican fight with President Obama, especially over refugees and Muslims and ISIS. And hopefully I can get this camera fixed by the time you finish watching that clip over here.
Thank you very much. We're going to turn now to the political fallout from these terror attacks. And our brand new ABC News Washington Post poll, Hillary Clinton holds a commanding lead on the Democratic side, but Bernie Sanders has gained 9 points since Joe Biden decided not to run. And on the Republican side, Donald Trump leads for the 4th straight month, 10 points ahead of Ben Carson, who doubles the support of Marco Rubio, followed by Ted Cruz and Jeb Bush, with his lowest number since he entered the race. Donald Trump joins us live after this report from John Karl.
The president was half a world away in Asia this week, but it seemed like he was on the campaign trail, repeatedly slamming Republicans who want to keep Syrian refugees out of the United States.
Apparently, they're scared of widows and orphans coming into the United States of America as part of our tradition of compassion.
Back in Washington, his own party was defying him. Nearly 4 dozen House Democrats joining Republicans in voting to stop admitting Syrian refugees until the government can certify they pose no threat. And more than half the country's governors have vowed to keep Syrian refugees out of their states. The president says the refugees are thoroughly vetted and pose no more threat than tourists. But with 2 of the Paris terrorists now suspected of sneaking into France as refugees, one using this doctored passport, security fears have soared. Our new ABC News Washington Post poll shows a majority now oppose taking in refugees. Voters also say the threat of terrorism is now second only to the economy as the most important election issue. And 54% disapprove of the president's handling of terrorism altogether. On the campaign trail, Ben Carson came under fire for comparing the screening of refugees to protecting children from rabid dogs.
If there's a rabid dog running around your neighborhood, you're probably not going to assume something good about that dog, and you're probably going to put your children out of the way. Doesn't mean that you hate all dogs.
And Donald Trump sparked a furor when a reporter asked him if he'd support a database to track Muslims in the U.S.
Should there be a database system that tracks the Muslims here in this country?
There should be a lot of systems beyond database. I mean, we should have a lot of systems. And today you can do it.
But for Muslims specifically, how do you actually get them registered into a database?
It would be just good management.
Under fire from fellow Republicans, Trump said the database he wants is just for Syrian refugees.
I do want database for those people coming in
I want surveillance if we have to. I want surveillance of certain mosques, okay?
And John Karl joins us now. John, we got more of the results of that poll right now, which has been remarkably steady.
Incredibly steady, George, through major controversies, through national debates watched by millions. Just look at the numbers since September. Marco Rubio has gone up ever so slightly, Bush down, but for Donald Trump and Ben Carson, the numbers are virtually unchanged. And consider this, it was our poll in July that first put Donald Trump as the frontrunner, and no matter what he has said or what others have said about him, he has not budged from the frontrunner since then.
And you showed those tough numbers for President Obama on terrorism, these terror attacks starting to transform the race.
Absolutely, and if you look at those numbers, George, that is the lowest approval for handling of terrorism for President Obama since he became president. On the Republican side, though, look who Republican voters say they trust most to handle terrorism now. Donald Trump far and away at the top of the list.
Okay, John Karl, thanks.
So, yeah, did I get rid of the box? I think I got rid of the box. So while you were watching that clip, I got rid of the box, but you saw sort of an overview of the political impact of these Paris attacks. I saw some of you in the comment section also saying that the resolution of this camera is better, so I hope that as I work the bugs out, this will be a better way to broadcast the show. Now, having shown that sort of overview clip that showed both a brief poll on the Democratic side of the race, and one of the things I noticed is Bernie Sanders has 32%, Donald Trump, who's such a juggernaut, he has 33%. So Bernie Sanders is doing as well as Donald Trump, just Donald Trump has a lot more opponents to split the vote than Bernie Sanders does, I guess, or that may be kind of a specious argument, but I just wanted to point that out. And I also wanted to point out that the refugee crisis, or the refugee controversy, is being used by the Republicans to really promote fear among their base, and it's really, the whole refugee program is not a good basis to drum up this kind of fear. And I want to show an analysis that Chuck Todd did over on NBC's Meet the Press, where he talked about just how well vetted people who go through the refugee program are, which I will discuss after you watch that clip over here.
Picture here. There's been nearly 785,000 refugees who have been admitted to the United States since 9/11. Only about a dozen, roughly 1/1000th of 1%, have been arrested or removed from the U.S. due to terrorism concerns. None of those folks removed were Syrian, by the way. The fact is, it's not easy to get into America via the refugee process. Let me walk you through how this worked just with Syrians. The United Nations has referred just over 23,000 Syrian refugees to the United States. Of those 23,000, 7,000 of them were thought to be worthy enough to be interviewed by the Department of Homeland Security. By the way, they were interviewed outside the United States. And of those 7,000, just 2,165 were accepted into the United States. Now, here's the issue. The real vulnerability that U.S. lawmakers might want to look into is not the refugee process. It's actually those traveling to the U.S. on visas or with European passports. Let me explain. The visa waiver program allows passport holders of 38 countries who meet certain requirements to travel to the United States without a visa, without like a next level of vetting. That includes France, by the way, and many other European Union countries. So what does this mean? It's important to remember, all 19 September 11th hijackers traveled to the United States on some form of a visa. None of them were refugees. It's this visa program that needs to be looked into by Congress. Back in a moment with ISIS and the 20.
So yeah, I thought that was a really good analysis from Chuck Todd on why being worried about our refugee program that has all this intensive vetting that lasts up to 2 years, that it's really kind of a red herring that we have this visa program, and especially the visa waiver program from Europe, that is a much easier way for would-be terrorists to get into the United States. And I want to also show how Chuck Todd raised that issue with the Secretary of Homeland Security, Jay Johnson, and his response was a little bit of a non sequitur, as I'll discuss after you watch that clip over here.
Syrian refugee issue. But in talking with law enforcement officials, you hear that that if Congress did anything, you'd like them to focus on the visa waiver issue. Explain, is it easier for an ISIS operative to get into this country via the visa waiver system or getting a visa than it is the refugee process?
Chuck, the reality is that something like only 2,100 Syrian refugees have been resettled in this country through a very extensive vetting process that takes something like 18 to 24 months. The visa waiver program is something that we've been focused on, frankly, since I've been secretary, because there are a number of foreign terrorist fighters who have gone into Iraq and Syria from countries in Europe and elsewhere. And so last year, we enhanced the security of the visa waiver program. This is a program where people in certain countries can come here without a visa. And we've been focused on enhancing the security of that. I ordered some enhancements late last year and then again in August. And Congress also is focused on this. And I think that there are ways that Congress can help us. And
should we eliminate, should we
members of Congress in coming days.
Should we temporarily eliminate the waiver program for a while?
No, I would not do that at all. The visa waiver program is very, very important to lawful trade, travel, commerce. It's a very popular program that people use virtually every day. But there are security enhancements that we have made, and we should evaluate whether more is necessary. And I'm happy to have that conversation with our friends in Congress. They're interested in this too.
Commissioner Bratton, I want to ask you to...
So that you get it there from the Secretary of Homeland Security, Jay Johnson, about the refugee program and how there's not really the danger. And he also talked about the visa waiver program. But actually, I thought one of the best defenses of taking in refugees, including Syrian refugees, came from the first Muslim elected to the U.S. Congress, Representative Keith Ellison. He was over on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, and the host, George Stephanopoulos, kind of teed him up with a softball question about how does he react to the way the Republicans are playing up this fear of refugees and immigrants. And you can see his answer over here.
Well, Congressman Ellison, this week, this whole debate over what to do with Syrian refugees, you heard Donald Trump say they should all go back. That combined with more surveillance of mosques, even the possibility of closing mosques, this debate has become hot.
It has, and that's exactly the wrong thing to do. I think we should project strength, and what that means is confidence in who we are as a nation. We're civilization. We give safe haven to refugees. We don't behead them and all these kind of bad things and exclude them. Let me just say that, you know, at this point in the game, we need to be adhering to the values that have made this country strong and not feeding into the Daesh narrative, which is exactly what these sort of panicky reactions are showing. Daesh says that Islam is at war with the West and the West is at war with Islam. This is a false statement. What we need to do is say that, no, we're not going to single out Muslims for a religious test to come into this country. We are going to have confidence in our Homeland Security Department, which has had 750,000 people, refugees admitted since 2001, and we are going to engage in diplomacy.
What about that argument that the House vote this week?
So that's the last clip I want to show on the refugee issue, which was a big political issue this week. I saw down in the comment section from my live viewers that I am having a little bit of a volume problem because I'm processing the clips a new way this week, and I had to use the component input because I realized that the way I was getting rid of the copyright protection signal on the HDMI input was possibly going to be a felony if I did it that way. I may even make a video about that later in this week about how you can inadvertently commit a felony without violating anyone's copyright. It's kind of ridiculous. But by next week I'm going to have a line level converter that should raise my audio level on the clips. And I have the audio level on my microphone like as low as it will go. And I have the clips kind of maximized, but it seems like it's not quite working. Maybe by next week I'll have that fixed. I apologize for that, but I want to move on to the next topic, the big topic of the week really, that I'm trying to hide in my tags and my title and even my video description that I'm talking so much about ISIS and Muslim terrorism and Islam, and because that's what stops my video from getting monetized. But whatever, I guess I just have to talk about it. And I'm going to start the topic of ISIS with a little bit of political comedy. This is actually the one brief clip I have from NBC's Saturday Night Live last night, which I thought there wasn't very much funny on Saturday Night Live last night, so I didn't really take much in terms of clips, but this is one clip sort of about ISIS that I thought was a little bit funny from Weekend Update. This is one of the co-hosts of Weekend Update on Saturday Night Live, Colin Jost, talking about ISIS and one of the unintended effects of the rise of ISIS over in this clip.
After recent events, a biotech company in California is considering changing its name from ISIS Pharmaceuticals, as well as its most popular drug, Boko Harambian.
Okay, well, not that funny, like I said, but since that was one of the funniest things I could pick out of Saturday Night Live last night, I guess you can figure how unfunny the rest of the program was. But, well, there were a few funny moments. I like the Star Wars, J.J. Abrams did this film comedy clip, or this little film section of the Saturday Night Live where they did some fake tryouts for the new episode of the Star Wars series. I thought that was kind of funny, but that wasn't really political, so doesn't really fit into the Liberal Viewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. It's not political comedy, but I picked out that one bit of political comedy that was kind of funny from Saturday Night Live, and now I'm going to move on to the topic of ISIS and the Paris attacks, and the threat of an imminent attack in Brussels was what was going on, the last news I was hearing this morning. And I'm going to show all that, and I'm going to show several different news organizations, the way they reported on it, starting with the most extensive report from ABC's Martha Raddatz. She talked about what's going on in Paris, what's going on in Brussels, and even talked about what she saw in Iraq and the fight against ISIS, and then used kind of a disturbing euphemism that I will describe what I mean by that at the end of the clip. This is about 3.5 minutes from ABC this morning, or actually 4 minutes over here.
Good morning, George. The lockdown is visible everywhere you go here in Brussels. The imminent threat on everyone's mind. And Belgian officials say the lockdown may continue through Monday, since they say terrorists are looking at places here where they could inflict mass casualties. It is unsettling here in Brussels this morning, a usually bustling European capital paralyzed. Soldiers patrolling streets, the U.S. Embassy ordering Americans here to shelter in place. A Paris-style attack is what they are expecting, the threat deemed serious and imminent. But on the second day of the high alert, tourists were milling around the usually lively Grand Plaza.
Christmas tree, armored vehicle. It's not normal. You know.
Local police were offering assurances.
We need to have support from the Belgian army, so everything is secure here in Brussels.
In neighboring France, officials are still looking for clues after the suspected planner of the Paris attacks, Abdelhamid Abaoud, was killed in a shootout Wednesday. And the manhunt growing for the world's most wanted man, the 8th Paris terrorist, Salah Abdeslam. Authorities say he drove to Belgium, passing unnoticed through 3 security checks. The lawyer for his companions telling ABC News he looked angry and was possibly wearing a suicide belt. Meanwhile, the survivors in Paris still haunted. The lead singer of the American band performing at Le Bataclan talked to Vice News.
A great reason why so many were killed is because so many people wouldn't leave their friends.
The specter of the jihadist threat is also rising in Mali, where Al-Qaeda is claiming credit for that deadly hotel siege. An American survivor telling his harrowing story to ABC's Alex Marquardt.
You had already resigned yourself to the fact that you were dead?
Yeah, basically. And then they never looked. They were shooting. The shells were hitting me. They never looked.
From Africa to Europe to the front line in the fight against ISIS, This week, we were in Iraq, where ISIS holds huge swaths of territory, but the Kurds have had some success in pushing ISIS back with help from American advisors. But the threat is still enormous. The Kurdish fighters have taken up positions all around Kirkuk. This soldier has his eye on ISIS. Meanwhile, this morning in Asia, President Obama insisting destroying ISIS is a realistic goal.
The most powerful tool we have to fight ISIS is to say that we're not afraid.
So, Mark, you've now spent this week on both fronts of what is at least a two-front war.
It really is, George. When you go into Iraq and you see the continuing airstrikes, and we were in the command center where they're conducting those airstrikes under pretty strict rules of engagement. We'll have to keep our eye on that and see whether they loosen those rules of engagement. But here in Brussels, the transition wasn't that difficult because you have soldiers all over the street. You have armored personnel carriers, as we saw, kind of just like being in Iraq. Also here, we're in a small square in the Molenbeek neighborhood. Just across from me is the home of where the missing terrorist used to live. And here, I talked to some people on the street today, including a 15-year-old girl, and I asked her what it was like to live in this neighborhood. A lot of people here have gone into Syria, and she said, yes, we do have some terrorists in the neighborhood, but we are not all terrorists. We are frightened ourselves of what is happening. George?
I bet they are. Okay, Mark.
So yeah, that was the ABC report. I thought it was the most extensive report because it went into look at what was going on in Iraq. What I found a little bit disturbing about that report was it talked about changing the rules of engagement, loosening the rules of engagement, and what that really means is kind of a euphemism for being less concerned about collateral damage and killing civilians. And I wish that when media sources are talking about the rules of engagement, I wish they would make that more clear, because that's like a cost in human life. That was the ABC report. Now I want to show you the CBS Face the Nation report, mainly just on Paris and Brussels and what's going on there. Somewhat similar to what you heard from ABC. This is from John Dickerson, I think is the host of Face the Nation. I can't remember if he's in this clip, but it's mostly from their reporter, Elizabeth Palmer. Why is that not working? Okay. Elizabeth Palmer over here.
Ground to cover today. We begin with CBS News correspondent Elizabeth Palmer in Paris.
In the Belgian capital, Brussels, this morning, things are eerily quiet. Police have told people to stay home. They've shut the subway. They've canceled public gatherings like football games and concerts. Salah Abdeslam, the young terrorist suspect who escaped after the Paris attacks, is thought to be in the area, possibly wearing a suicide vest. But it's not only him. The Belgian police think there are between 8 and 10 other young men who want to carry out attacks similar to the ones we saw here in Paris. In Paris, life is gradually getting back to normal, although the government has said other attacks are possible. The tension went up suddenly on Friday when gunmen invaded the Radisson Hotel in Bamako in Mali, which is a former French capital, and killed 19 people. Those gunmen are radical Islamists, but they are not affiliated with ISIS. And it's ISIS that's in the sights of the French government and the President Francois Hollande. He wants to put together an international alliance to destroy ISIS, which would include not only Russia but also the United States. He's also leaning very heavily on European governments to clean up their immigration controls and tighten surveillance. We know from the Greeks that at least 2 of the terrorists from the Paris attacks came into the European Union through the Greek island of Leros with that flood of migrants. The surveillance of these young men coming back to Europe from fighting with the Islamic State in Syria has been very, very lax. And Francois Hollande wants a passenger list to be started up, something like what the United States established after 9/11, which would keep a list of everybody coming in and out of the 26 member country zone, and that data would be kept on file for at least a year.
Liz Palmer.
So that's Elizabeth Palmer, the CBS reporter on Face the Nation, giving a couple-minute report, hitting on some of those similar facts about this imminent threat in Brussels, that the U.S. citizens have been told to shelter in place, and apparently there's this person who was involved in the Paris terrorist attacks who's on the loose with a suicide vest, and that was also reported over on CNN State of the Union, where Jake Tapper started the show by saying the State of the Union is is high alert, and talked about some of those same basic facts, and also about President Obama's response over in this clip.
Hello, I'm Jake Tapper in Washington, where the State of our Union is on high alert. Police still on the hunt for at least one of the Paris attackers who escaped, and Belgium warning its citizens of a, quote, serious and imminent threat to its capital, Brussels, suspending subway service and telling people not to go near the train station or the airports. The U.S. Embassy there has told Americans to shelter in place at home. President Obama this morning said he's determined to prevent an ISIS attack on U.S. soil.
I think that the American people are right to be concerned and to expect that we in the government and in law enforcement are doing everything we can to disrupt terrorist attacks, to intercept intelligence that may lead us to individuals who are willing to carry out these attacks.
President Obama has spent the week battling critics who say his plan to accept thousands.
So that was a much briefer report on what's going on in Paris and Brussels from CNN State of the Union. And now I actually want to show the one from Fox News Sunday. Their reporter Greg Palkot is in Paris. And it's actually, for Fox News, not really that biased. I'm going to show some more biased clips from Fox News later when Chris Wallace had on Rush Limbaugh to talk about the Republicans and to talk about whether Rush Limbaugh is a purveyor of hate or not. But this report from Greg Palkot, not really that much different from what you saw from ABC and CBS. This is the Fox News version of what's going on in Paris and Brussels in this clip.
Chris, authorities in Brussels are now saying they are worried about a Paris-style terror attack there. That is why, for the second day running, the Belgian capital is on lockdown. Troops and armored vehicles are out in force. The city's subway, malls, and other public places are off limits. Definitely related, the ongoing search for the eighth attacker in the Paris terror, Salah Abdeslam. He reportedly has been seen around Brussels, has a suicide vest in his possession, and is described as agitated. Meanwhile, in the former French colony of Mali in West Africa, authorities are seeking those suspects in the hotel terror assault on Friday. An al-Qaeda-linked group in the region has claimed responsibility. 19 people were killed, including 41-year-old American Anita Datar. She was an international development specialist and a mother of an 8-year-old son. And finally, back here in France, authorities remain very much on a wartime footing. In the past week, they have launched close to 1,000 anti-terror raids nationwide. They have detained over 100 suspects and have seized some 200 weapons. This week, French President Hollande meets with President Obama in Washington, Russian President Putin in Moscow, as well as the leaders of EU countries and Turkey. All this, it is said, to bolster an international coalition fighting ISIS. A very difficult fight indeed is turning out. Chris.
Greg Palkot.
So yeah, that was Greg Palkot reporting from Paris on Fox News to show you the fourth of the five corporate media outlets reporting on the attacks, or the aftermath of the attack in Paris, and this imminent threat in Brussels, and the Paris attacker apparently with a suicide vest running around Brussels in some, that's why there's such an imminent threat. So having shown 4 of the 5 corporate news outlets reports, I guess I should show the 5th one. This is about a 3-minute report. It's an introduction from Chuck Todd on NBC's Meet the Press, talking about the angle that he's going to get from their reporter Richard Engle. That's not my pun, that's kind of what they wrote into their own script there. And you'll see one thing that's a little different in this report from Richard Engels. He talks about how the United States and some Western countries are prioritizing the fight against ISIS, but when we try to build this coalition with countries in the Middle East, that actually isn't their top priority, which is at the end of this report that includes a lot of the same information on Paris and Brussels from NBC over here.
Although there seems to be global consensus that ISIS needs to be wiped out, why is it so hard to build a coalition to do just that? Our chief foreign correspondent, Richard Engle, has been looking into this angle and try to answer that question.
The day the French now call Black Friday was ISIS's terrifying breakout moment. The moment the world realized that the group is a global threat. It's a level of sophistication that took the Obama administration by surprise.
Well, I think there was a widespread belief that it was just another violent jihadist group and that these groups were brutal, and because of their brutality, they inevitably failed.
ISIS turns out to be the most successful terrorist organization in recent history. Francois Heisberg, one of France's top advisors on counterterrorism, says Europe's security forces are struggling to keep up with the group he calls by the Arab name Daesh.
We have yet to build up a skill base and the number of people needed to keep track of an organization as professional and as competent as Daesh. Daesh leaves Al-Qaeda in the dust.
But after claiming responsibility for the Russian plane, the Beirut bombings, and now Paris, ISIS has put itself in almost everyone's crosshairs. France intensified its bombing of the ISIS capital Raqqa after Paris and moved an aircraft carrier into the region. Russia is attacking ISIS, launching more cruise missiles. President Putin promised to punish the group relentlessly. Washington has been attacking ISIS for over a year, and Iran and Hezbollah have been at it longer than that. Why can't so many powerful nations and groups beat a terrorist army? One reason is obvious. Critics say there's no coordination, and no war can be won without a plan. But what's worse, there are rivalries over the future of the land ISIS currently occupies, especially in the Middle East.
Saudi Arabia and many of the United States' other allies don't like the Islamic State, but its destruction is not their top priority. It's third or fourth down the list. Turkey, for example, is more worried about the Kurds establishing their own state. Saudi Arabia is more worried about Iran, and so on down the list. There are very few countries who share the United States' desire to destroy the Islamic State as a first-order priority.
And many, Chuck, are now wondering whether what happened in Paris will be enough to shock the world into finding some sort of consensus, or will it take yet another terrorist massacre to do that? And ISIS is now threatening attacks in the United States.
All right, Richard.
So, I don't know, did I just fix the audio? I don't know, maybe I did a little bit. But that's the last of the 5. I've been reading your comments and seeing that there's a lot of problems with the audio. Is this? No, I did not even fix the source of the audio here. Hold on here. Change audio source. That's the problem. Turn this off. Okay, wait, okay. There we go. Turn this up. Turn this. The okay. Okay, now I think I have my audio about the same as my video. That's a little bit of a technical adjustment during the show. Sorry, I guess I didn't realize I was actually using the microphone on my video camera as well as this. Oop! I just hit myself in the face with the microphone. That's pretty embarrassing. Okay, this is all embarrassing. Sorry. All these technical problems. There we go. So that was pretty embarrassing, and then technical problems, but I've shown you the 5 different corporate news media outlets and how they covered this ISIS attack on Paris and the ongoing threat in Brussels, and to varying degrees the ongoing fight against ISIS in Syria and Iraq. The next set of clips on this same topic I want to show you are on the subtopic of whether there's an imminent threat or a credible threat of any sort of attack on the United States. And the first clip I want to show is also from NBC's Meet the Press. This is Chuck Todd asking the Secretary of Homeland Security, Jay Johnson, if there is any credible threat of an attack in the United States. And basically he says no, but he also talks about how they have to remain vigilant, etc., over in this clip.
About Brussels, I mean, the fact that the threat was so imminent that they shut down the subway system. The U.S. Embassy said shelter in place. I assume there's been some intelligence sharing here. How serious is that Brussels threat, and how concerned is it that it's somehow related to something that might happen here?
We're continually in touch with law enforcement, intelligence authorities in Western Europe, in Brussels, and in Paris and elsewhere, and we monitor these things. As I said, we're concerned about potential copycat acts, things of that nature, and that's why we're out here today. We're continuing to be vigilant. We're continuing to monitor, reevaluate. There's also a role for the public to play too, Chuck, which is if you see something, say something. That's got to be more than a slogan. But in general, with this holiday season coming up, we want the public to continue to go to public events, celebrate the holiday season, travel, be with their families and the like, and to know that law enforcement, our intelligence community, our national security officials are on the job overtime.
Commissioner Bratton, you just...
So that was the Secretary of Homeland Security, Jay Johnson, saying there really isn't a credible threat and we should celebrate the holidays with our families, go about our business, etc., etc. But there were Republicans who didn't seem to want to just stop at the idea that there is no credible evidence of a credible threat, you know, nothing concrete for us to be worried about here in the United States. I want to show this next clip is from CNN's State of the Union, where Jake Tapper had on the chair of the House Intelligence Committee, Devin Nunes, a Republican, and he asked him about something that the mayor of New York, Bill de Blasio, said about there being no credible threat, and the Republican chair of House Homeland Security, House Intelligence Committee did say that there was no credible threat, but you know, we still don't know because we don't know what we don't know, or, well, you can see that clip yourself over here.
Union ISIS has released a new video warning of an impending attack on New York City. This just days after the terrorists vowed to strike Washington, D.C. New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio led a chorus of officials trying to reassure Americans that there is no imminent threat.
It's important to note that there is no credible and specific threat against New York City. NYPD has been working very, very closely with the FBI and our other federal partners, and I again repeat, there is no specific and credible threat against New York City.
Joining me now is the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Congressman Devin Nunes. Congressman, thanks for joining us. Is that correct? Is there no credible threat against New York City or Washington or anywhere in the U.S.?
No credible threat that we know about, Jake. That's the real issue here, is that because so many of the terrorists have gotten good at their operational security, we just don't know what we don't know. And so there's nothing specific except for the threats that they've been putting out there on the internet. So at this point, we have to take everything seriously.
Several terrorists involved.
So that, like I said, that's the Republican chair of the House Intelligence Committee saying that there's no credible threat or no imminent threat to the United States. But that's the problem. We don't know what we don't know. And that's kind of the same answer you'll see from this clip over on CBS's Face the Nation, where John Dickerson had on the chair of the House Homeland Security Committee, Mike McCaul, and he kind of made the same point. And then he went into this whole attack on those people who are tying our hands at surveillance and stopping us from being able to break encryption. He's echoes something that the senator from California, a supposed Democrat, but fairly right-wing on these issues, Dianne Feinstein. I didn't take a clip from her, but she also wanted, Silicon Valley and the tech industry to let the CIA and other groups have backdoors into encryption, basically. And you can see the Republican Mike McCaul is basically saying that over in this clip.
Start with the ISIS threats to both New York and Washington. The threats have been made, but the FBI and Homeland Security say there's no credible evidence. Do you agree with that assessment?
Well, we don't have any specific and credible evidence of a plot underway, but I will say in the Homeland we've arrested over 70 ISIS followers over the last year. We have 1,000 investigations in all 50 states. If that gives you some magnitude of what the FBI and Homeland officials are looking at. Obviously, New York and Washington are the top two targets. I talked to NYPD yesterday. They have this active shooter program. They put 3,000 cops through that. They are ramping up security in both seen and unseen ways, in a very visible way also to provide deterrence on the streets as we go into the Thanksgiving holiday.
I want to ask you about this expression, no credible threat. How confident should Americans be when they hear that? I mean, in Paris, presumably last Thursday, there was no credible evidence or they would have acted on it. So what does that really mean in today's terror environment?
Well, it's an old term of art, but I will tell you, John, and I agree with Senator Feinstein, I think the biggest threat today is the idea that terrorists can communicate in dark space, dark platforms, and we can't see what they're saying. So people ask me, well, how did the Paris attacks, a very complex, sophisticated, coordinated attack involving 8 attackers and a wide conspiracy of others, how did that go under the radar? The only rationale explanation I have is that they were using these dark platforms in dark space to communicate that even if we have a court order, we can't see. And if you can't see what they're saying, it's very difficult to stop it. So while Homeland Security officials can say there's no specific and credible threat, I think you need to factor in that analysis that there may be plots underway and communications underway that we just, quite frankly, can't see. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we face right now.
So it seems like that's a weaker assurance than it used to be in the past. Just following up, though, on these dark spaces, but is there any evidence that encryption was used? It's just a supposition, right? Or have you seen any evidence that suggests these encrypted communications actually were used in the Paris attack?
Well, I think there are strong indicators that they did. And that's precisely why nothing was picked up. There were some warnings about a general plot underway with nothing specific. These guys were talking to each other on their iPhones, flipping out SIM cards. In my judgment, they were talking in the dark space. And that's how they pulled it off without detection. And that's going to be the real challenge in the Homeland, is how do you stop? Because we know that they're talking from Morocco to people in Paris and Belgium, but also in the United States. We've caught communications where they talk to people in New York and D.C. and quite frankly, everywhere. We had the Garland attacks, 4th of July, and the Chattanooga case, which are very good examples of this.
Let me ask you about refugees.
So there you see Republican Mike McCaul being pretty clear that there's some sort of encryption going on according to his conclusions, but not really being able to give any evidence of any kind of encryption, or it seems more like an attack on those people who are worried about surveillance. And I guess since I showed that Republican being so pro-surveillance, I should show also another clip from CBS's Face the Nation. This is Senator Rand Paul, who's also running for president, but not doing very well. But he is definitely not in favor of that kind of surveillance. And he points out that both bulk phone record collection, he points out that hasn't really been effective. And he also points out that there's no real evidence of an encryption problem. I believe that he mentions the encryption problem. This is also from CBS's Face the Nation this morning, talking to John Dickerson over here.
Back to the Homeland here for a moment. You have been very careful about stopping overreach in terms of U.S. surveillance. We've had some talk this morning about encryption being the big backdoor, the way these terrorists can communicate. What's your sense of, how much do you worry that there will be an overreach in terms of additional surveillance operations?
I'm very worried about that, because I think when you have a fearful time or an angry time, that people are coaxed into giving up their liberty. Already many in the intelligence community are saying, oh, if we only had the bulk phone collection program back. Well, what they're not telling you and what they're being dishonest about is we still have the phone collection program. In the United States, all phone records are still being collected all the time, and we still had the attack. And realize that in France, they have bulk collection or surveillance of their citizens 1,000-fold greater than what we have, with very little privacy protections. They still didn't know anything about this. So what I would argue is that you can keep giving up liberty, but in the end, I don't think we'll be safer, but we may have lost who we are as a people in the process. And I'm going to fight to make sure that doesn't happen.
In the last 20 seconds, surveillance of mosques. Do you put that in the same category in terms of overreach to answer this threat?
If you're going to do surveillance to religious institutions, yes. I think surveillance, though, has a fairly low threshold for individuals. And I think the discussion should be, will we have surveillance? Will we follow people who we think are at risk? That's even a lower threshold than getting a search warrant. So, yes, we should follow people who are at risk. Should we talk to their neighbors and friends? Should we talk to their imam? Sure, all of that is legitimate. But should we target mosques and have a database of Muslims? Absolutely not. And I think that's really disqualifying for both Donald Trump and Marco Rubio to say that we're going to close down every place that potentially has a discussion that might lead to extremism. That would require some sort of religious czar that I think isn't consistent with our freedom.
All right, Senator Rand Paul, thanks so much.
So that was Senator Rand Paul talking almost a little bit of sense, I guess, for a Republican anyway, on the whole ISIS issue. And that's the last clip I want to show specifically on ISIS and the Paris attacks and the threat in Brussels that may be leading to an attack at any time, at least according to the news reports I've been watching today. But the next topic I'm moving on to has a lot of influence from that last topic. It's the topic of the Republicans running for president, the 2016 presidential race, and it was definitely dominated by fear, and there were a lot of Islamophobia, if I can use that word. I know some of my viewers don't even think that word exists, but I think if you were watching the news this week, the evidence that Islamophobia actually exists was pretty strong. And I'll start with an NBC Meet the Press clip where Chuck Todd actually talks about Republicans engaging in the politics of fear. And I'm a little afraid that my dog is going to knock over the camera here, which I will try to take care of while you watch that clip over here.
The attacks in Paris have shifted the focus of the campaign, at least temporarily, from the economy to terrorism. And while President Obama's response to the Paris attacks was roundly criticized for being a bit tone-deaf and dispassionate, the Republican presidential candidates have been playing on the politics of fear in an extraordinary way.
Database is okay, and watch list is okay, and surveillance is okay. If you don't mind, I want to surveil. I want surveillance of these people that are coming in. I want surveillance of certain mosques, okay? If that's okay. I want surveillance. And you know what? We've had it before and we'll have it again.
Those planes that flew into the Twin Towers weren't piloted by a bunch of ticked-off Presbyterians.
If there's a rabid dog running around in your neighborhood, you're probably not going to assume something good about that dog, and you're probably going to put your children out of the way. Doesn't mean that you hate all dogs.
The politics of fear can be effective politically, but when does tough rhetoric turn into Islamophobia? That's the discussion we're going to have right after the break.
They actually use the word Islamophobia on NBC's Meet the Press, and I'm actually not going to show any clips from that discussion on Meet the Press, although it was interesting. And if you want to see the entire Meet the Press episode, I put a link down in the video description as usual to the source of all my clips. I think all 5 of the corporate news outlets let you watch the entire show, except CNN's State of the Union. For some reason, you can't watch the entire show, but you can watch most of it. And then the other 4 networks let you watch the entire show if you want to, using links down in the video description. But having shown that pretty, I don't know, I would say accurate, but some people would say liberally biased, I guess, because over on Fox News Sunday, you didn't hear anything about Republicans engaging in the politics of fear. But actually, the next clip I want to show, and let me make sure I have it right from my clip list, is going to be from CBS's Face the Nation, where John Dickerson actually talked about the CBS tracking poll and the results. This is taken after the Paris attacks, and basically Ben Carson is dropping and Ted Cruz is on his way up, I think, at least if you believe the results of the CBS tracking poll over in this clip.
News Battleground Tracker. In Iowa, the ground has shifted. Donald Trump is still in first. He's out front with 30%. But Ted Cruz is picking up momentum and is now at 21%. Ben Carson has dropped to 19%, down 8 points from last month. After Carson, Marco Rubio comes in at 11%. The next candidate is Jeb Bush with 5%, and Carly Fiorina is at 4%. The rest of the field comes in with 2% or lower. In New Hampshire, again, it's Donald Trump on top with 32%. Marco Rubio has made gains there and is now at 13%. Ben Carson drops to 10%, where he's joined with Ted Cruz. John Kasich comes in at 8%. Jeb Bush, Rand Paul, and Carly Fiorina are all bunched up at 6%, with Chris Chrstie at 5% support. The rest of the field is at 1% or less. South Carolina is all Donald Trump, too. He's at 35%. Carson is at 19%. Rubio close behind there with 16%. Senator Cruz at 13%. Jeb Bush comes in with 5%, and the rest of the field is at 3% or less. We want to.
So that was the CBS Battleground Tracker poll of what's going on with the Republicans. And there are actually similar results from the Fox News Opinion Dynamics poll, and they throw in one number on Hillary Clinton just to show how untrustworthy she is, because they can't go through a poll on Fox News, I guess, without mentioning that Hillary Clinton isn't trustworthy. But the other results are pretty similar to what you saw from that CBS Battleground Tracker poll, that Cruz is on his way up and Ben Carson has dropped somewhat. And that's over in this clip.
Breaking news. The first Fox News national poll since the Paris attack shows how the wave of terror has reshaped that race since early November. Frontrunner Donald Trump has widened his lead, but Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz are also on the rise, threatening to overtake a slumping Ben Carson for the number 2 spot. Rubio tops the candidates on who's honest and trustworthy with a net score of +20, just above Ben Carson. Trump and Hillary Clinton are in negative territory. And when it comes to how GOP candidates run against Clinton, Rubio does the best against the presumptive Democratic nominee. Joining me now from the campaign.
And joining him now from the campaign trail is Senator Marco Rubio. And the next clip I'm going to show is a question that Chris Wallace asked Senator Marco Rubio on Fox News Sunday, and it's about the refugee crisis and whether Marco Rubio had opposed a bill to increase vetting, or whether there needed to be vetting. And he even mentions, I think, the visa waiver program a little bit, but it's, I don't know, I think there's more heat than light in the discussion of the refugee crisis and the danger from refugees over on Fox News Sunday between Chris Wallace and Marco Rubio, as I'll discuss after you watch that clip over here.
Become a very hot issue this last week, and that's the question of what to do about the Syrian refugees. You've put out a pretty firm line on that. You say you want to block the admittance of any Syrian refugees because you say, quite frankly, we don't have the information, the intel, the database to vet them properly. Does that mean that you will vote against the bill that was passed by the House this week overwhelmingly, which would allow Syrian refugees into the country but under tightened security?
No, my argument is that we can't allow anyone in this country that we can't vet. And I believe that the vast majority of refugees that are trying to come here are people we will not be able to vet. Does common sense still apply? Of course it does. A 5-year-old orphan, a 90-year-old widow, a well-known Chaldean priest. These are obviously common sense applications, and you can clearly vet them just by common sense. But what about someone who doesn't fit that profile? There is no reliable database that we can rely on. There is no existing government institution in their home country that we can call up and run them against.
But I guess the question...
We cannot vet most of these people.
But the question
the House bill, I think, is an appropriate response. And what you're going to find is a result of the House bill.
But I don't understand, because the House bill isn't going to create the databases that you say aren't there.
The House bill will require both the Director of the FBI and of Homeland Security to personally certify that each person being admitted has been fully vetted and that they're confident that they're not going to be terrorists. They won't be able to do that in most cases, because even they will tell you in both, in private conversations, and some have said it publicly, that we do not have the capability today to fully vet people that are coming from that region of the world. We just don't have the access to information that will allow us to do that.
But let me pick up on that if I can, Senator Rubio, because critics say that you and all the other Republicans, or a lot of the other Republicans, are misleading the American people about how detailed the vetting process is. They note that the UN now checks Syrian refugees out in refugee camps in the region for 4 to 10 months. Then U.S. officials pick up the vetting and screen them for 18 to 24 months. And they say, given how easy it is for those refugees to get into Europe, why would an ISIS operative want to wait 3 years, go through all of that vetting to try to get into the U.S.?
Well, that question answers itself. The United States is the ultimate prize in their mind. If ISIS is able to conduct a successful operation in the U.S., or I believe even Canada for that matter, of the scale of what you saw in Paris, it would be an enormous bonanza for them in terms of funding, but also of recruits from all over the world. It would be a huge messaging win for ISIS and continue to grow their movement. The second point is, it's not that the vetting is not extensive, it is that the databases do not exist. When you're vetting someone, you are basically comparing them to information that you've acquired. And in the case of people coming from that part of the world today, we do not have good information about that part of the world. We have even less information about people coming from Syria than we did with the Iraqi refugees after the aftermath of that war 5 or 10 years ago. And so it's not that the vetting isn't happening, is that the vetting does not have reliable data to which we can compare it against.
Okay,
and that's the problem.
Let me...
So that was Senator Marco Rubio trying to say that we couldn't vet refugees, despite those actually fairly good facts from Chris Wallace about how extensive the refugee vetting process is, first with the UN and then for the United States, for people to get into the United States. And that kind of mirrors what I showed on Meet the Press. I was reading your comments down in the live comments in the comment section. Someone asked me to do a Marco Rubio, so here... There's a little Marco Rubio, and I imported a clip from the old Colbert Report back before Stephen Colbert was on CBS, where he talked about, or this is his little graphic on what I'm talking about when I talk about doing a Marco Rubio.
Rubio, Mr. Thirsty. Rubio, Mr. Thirsty. Rubio, Mr. Thirsty. Rubio.
Oh, sorry, I think I had that on an endless loop. That was a little disturbing, but... Marco Rubio, Mr. Thirsty. That was like his State of the Union response a while back. But having shown that fairly reasonable, I mean, not that reasonable response from Senator Marco Rubio, but reasonable compared to the next presidential candidate I'm going to show. This is Donald Trump, who did a live phone interview over on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. And first, here he is talking about whether he wants to have a database for all Muslims and surveillance on mosques. And I'll talk about that a little more after you see that clip. Wait, where'd it go? Oh, here it is.
Controversy with those comments over the database. Let's try to clear that up. Are you unequivocally now ruling out a database on all Muslims?
No, not at all. I want a database for the refugees that if they come into the country. We have no idea who these people are. when the Syrian refugees are going to start pouring into this country. We don't know if they're ISIS. We don't know if it's a Trojan horse. And I definitely want a database and other checks and balances. We want to go with watch lists. We want to go with databases. And we have no choice. We have no idea who's being sent in here. This could be the great Trojan. It's probably not, but it could be the great Trojan horse of all time where they come in. When I look at those migration, when I look at the migration and the lines, and I see all strong, very powerful-looking men. They're men. And I see very few women. I see very few children. There's something strange going on. And if you look at what's happening in Europe, a lot of bad things are happening in Europe. Just ask the folks that live in Germany, George. A lot of bad things are happening. So
the statistics
we want to be smart. We want to, hey, George, we want to be vigilant. We have to be vigilant. And we have to call is radical. You know, we have to just say it's radical Islamic terrorism, and that's what it is. And we have a president that won't even issue the term. But when these Syrians come in, or wherever they are, because we're not even sure that they're coming in from Syria, if they're going to come in, we have to be very, very vigilant. And database would be fine for them, and watch list is fine. We have to watch and see what we're doing. They should not come in, by the way. They should not be allowed in.
Just for the record, though, the statistics do show that the majority of the refugees coming in are women and children. You've also told Yahoo News.
Well, that was nice of George Stephanopoulos to point out that most of the refugees are women and children, despite what Donald Trump was saying there. And I guess he was saying there that a database for some Muslims and also a watch list. But he, of course, as usual, he doesn't really go into details. But in the continuation of that questioning, this is what the next second I stopped that clip, and then I wanted to show you this slightly longer clip where George Stephanopoulos got Donald Trump to say that he thinks we should bring back waterboarding and enhanced interrogation. And this is also the clip where he talks about being in favor of surveillance on mosques, as he will justify over in this clip.
And children. You've also told Yahoo News that we have to be doing things that were unthinkable a year ago. I want to get into what you had in mind. For example, do you think we should bring back enhanced interrogation like waterboarding?
Well, we have to be strong. You know, they don't use waterboarding over there. They use chopping off people's heads. They use drowning people. I don't know if you've seen with the cages where they put people in cages and they drown them in the ocean and then they lift out the cage. And we're talking about waterboarding.
So you bring back waterboarding?
We have to. I would bring it back. Yes, I would bring it back. I think waterboarding is peanuts compared to what they do to us, what they're doing to us, what they did to James Foley when they chopped off his head. That's a whole different level. And I would absolutely bring back interrogation and strong interrogation.
You've also said we have to consider closing mosques. Jeb Bush called that a sign of weakness.
Well, Jeb Bush is a weak person, and that's been defined very strongly. I mean, Jeb is a weak person who is I call him a low-energy person. That's what he is. I mean, you call him anything you want. But Jeb is a person that will not solve a problem like this. You have very, very tough people that you're dealing with. They only understand strength. They don't understand weakness. Somebody like Jeb and others that are running against me. And by the way, Hillary is another one. I mean, Hillary is a person who doesn't have the strength or the stamina, in my opinion, to be president. She doesn't have strength or stamina. She's not a strong enough person to be president.
But what would be your criteria for closing a mosque?
We're dealing with very, very strong people, and you need strength and you need stamina.
I get that, but I want to get the details, though. What would be your criteria for closing a mosque, and how does that square with the First Amendment? You said your top priority would be to preserve and protect our religious liberty. Is that only for Christians? What are your criteria for closing a mosque?
Well, I don't want to close mosques. I want to surveil mosques. I want mosques surveilled. We were doing it in New York City for a while until the worst mayor that New York City has ever had got elected, de Blasio, which was a fluke. And, well, I would do certainly there are certain hot spots, and everybody knows they're hot spots. And let me tell you, the people that aren't involved in those mosques, they know who the bad ones are, and they know who the good ones are, but they don't talk. And we have to surveil the mosques. And we were doing it. We were doing it recently until de Blasio closed them up in New York City. We were doing it recently. We have to surveil the mosques. And big material and good material, from what I understood from a very good source, was coming out of those mosques. We were learning a lot. And they were stopping problems and potential problems by learning what was happening. Hey, look, I don't want to close up mosques, but things have to happen where you have got to use strong measures, or you're going to see buildings coming down all over New York City and
You've
elsewhere.
also talked about you want to keep the...
Strong measures or buildings are going to come down. I mean, he said the word strength so many times in those last two answers. That seems to be his big poll-tested word that he wants to... He's strong, and Hillary's not strong. Jeb's not strong. He's the one who's showing strength, and it's kind of like was it? I can't remember which Obama advisor said that strong and wrong is better than right and weak, or I don't know, something like that. But I think Donald Trump is one of the great examples of the strong and wrong, and he stays strong and wrong. And this last clip I'm going to show of his interview with George Stephanopoulos, where Stephanopoulos pointed out to him that he had said that he witnessed these Muslims in New Jersey cheering the Twin Towers coming down on September 11th, and that's pretty much an internet myth that's been debunked, even though there were some news reports that claimed that happened. Of course, there were like Palestinians in the occupied territories in Israel that actually did cheer the news of 9/11, but there are no documented examples of, and even the New Jersey police said that this reported incident didn't happen, but of course that doesn't stop Donald Trump from claiming it happens, or that it happened over in this clip.
You raised some eyebrows yesterday with comments you made at your latest rally. I want to show them relating to 9/11.
Hey, I watched when the World Trade Center came tumbling down. And I watched in Jersey City, New Jersey, where thousands and thousands of people were cheering as that building was coming down. Thousands of people were cheering.
You know, the police say that didn't happen, and all those rumors have been on the internet for some time. So did you misspeak
It did
yesterday?
happen. I saw it. It was on
saw
television.
that with your own eyes?
George, it
Police
did
say it
happen.
didn't
There were
happen.
people that were cheering in the other side of New Jersey, where you have large Arab populations. They were cheering as the World Trade Center came down. I know it might be not politically correct for you to talk about it, but there were people cheering as that building came down, as those buildings came down. And that tells you something. It was well covered at the time, George. Now, I know they don't like to talk about it, but it was well covered at the time. There were people over in New Jersey that were watching it, a heavy Arab population, that were cheering as the buildings came down. Not good.
As I said, the police have said...
George Stephanopoulos points out at the end there that I cut off that the police said that never really happened about cheering Muslims or Arabs or whoever it was in New Jersey at the Twin Towers, the World Trade Center coming down. That never happened. It was an internet myth, but apparently Donald Trump still remembers it happening, and he won't back down when he's wrong and strong. As I said, that's Donald Trump. Not quite as strong, but pretty much as wrong, I think, is the second place candidate still in most of the polls, although Ted Cruz apparently is coming up. But Dr. Ben Carson, in at least the national polls, is second to Donald Trump. I'm going to only show one clip of Dr. Ben Carson reacting to some of those Donald Trump positions there. First, he does seem to be in favor of waterboarding, but he doesn't really want to say what he's in favor of because he doesn't want to tip off the terrorists. And then he also seems to be in favor of surveillance of mosques, churches, shopping malls, or wherever terrorists may gather, or wherever where radicalization may occur, as he explains also to George Stephanopoulos on ABC this morning over in this clip.
Glad you're with us right now, and I do want to get your response on some of the things we talked about with Donald Trump on how to respond to ISIS. Number one, he said we should bring back those enhanced interrogation techniques which President Obama discontinued, like waterboarding. Do you agree?
I agree that there's no such thing as political correctness when you're fighting an enemy who wants to destroy you and everything that you have anything to do with. And I'm not one who's real big on telling the enemy what we're going to do and what we're not going to do.
But you would do that even though many consider waterboarding torture?
As I said, I'm not real big on telling them what we would or would not do. I just don't think that's I don't see where that accomplishes anything for us.
You have said we should monitor any churches or mosques where there's a lot of radicalization or things that are anti-American. How would you determine that?
Well, what I said in a larger capacity, that we should monitor anything, mosque, church, school, shopping center, where there's a lot of radicalization going on.
But how would you know that's happening?
Intelligence. We have intelligence on the ground already. We do need to enhance that. For instance, we've learned last week that the FBI seems to be able to monitor 30 to 60 people at a time. And we know there's a lot more than that need to be monitored. We need to get very serious about our intelligence. Remember what happened with the monitoring at the airports. So much of the stuff was able to get through. We have to really improve that very significantly. We're talking about the safety of the American people.
So you want to enhance the intelligence. How about this issue of the terror wall?
Well, so that's the one clip I want to show of Dr. Ben Carson. I'm hoping he's peaked in the Republican field because he has shown, as he's gotten more scrutiny, when he almost became the front runner there right before the Paris terrorist attacks, and then he started saying some kind of weird things about foreign policy that even the Republican base couldn't handle. He seemed to have dropped a little, but I don't know, he could still have strength in Iowa because that's the home of the evangelical Christians, and he's a pretty heavily evangelical Christian, which was one of the things actually that Bill Maher pointed out on HBO's Real Time last Friday in his New Rules segment. I'm going to show a clip from that later, just about some other crazy Republican Christian politician ideas, or Christian ideas of Republican politicians, I guess. But first, this clip is specifically on Ben Carson, so I wanted to show it right after that Ben Carson clip. And it shows an actual painting that is hanging in Ben Carson's home. This is not a joke. You'll see the painting of Ben Carson and a famous historical figure or religious figure that Bill Maher refers to when he also talks about why it means that Ben Carson is not qualified to be commander-in-chief, from the end of HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher last Friday night over here.
New rule, I know the Constitution says there can be no religious test for holding office, but sorry, you can't get your hands on the nuclear launch codes if you own a painting of yourself with Jesus in a bathrobe. This is a painting that hangs in Ben Carson's home of him and Jesus apparently enjoying a spa day. So yes, you can believe whatever you want and still run for office, but it's got to work the other way too. As a voter, it's perfectly fine for me to say, Dr. Giggles, because you, sir, are a clear and present ding-dong.
So yeah, I thought that was kind of funny, and I had seen some posts in the last few weeks about the interior of Dr. Ben Carson's home that included that actual painting of him with, I don't know if it's Jesus in a bathrobe going to a spa day. That is, I guess, a little bit of humorous interpretation by Bill Maher, but it's still kind of, it's still a very weird painting for anyone to have hanging in their home, at least in my opinion. But I wanted to show you that, and I want to move on to a couple of the lesser Republican candidates who did interviews on the Sunday morning shows. First, a clip from New Jersey Governor Chrstie reacting to Donald Trump's idea to do surveillance of Muslims, or how we should treat the whole terrorist problem, and he tries to come across strong but reasonable, and I don't know if he really accomplishes either of those two goals, but I will discuss that with you after you watch the clip yourself from CNN State of the Union talking to Jake Tapper. This is Governor Chrstie this morning here.
They're looking for answers about how to fight and defeat ISIS. I want you to take a listen to what the frontrunner of your party, Donald Trump, has had to say this week.
Should be a database system that tracks the Muslims here in this country.
There should be a lot of systems beyond database. I mean, we should have a lot of systems. And today you can do it. I want surveillance of certain mosques, okay? If that's okay. I will also quickly and decisively bomb the hell out of ISIS.
Governor Chrstie, you're speaking Tuesday to the Council on Foreign Relations about your approach to international relations. How are you going to be different from your party's frontrunner?
Listen, first off, Jake, what we've got and what we'll talk about on Tuesday is an approach that's based in my experience. I'm the only person in this race who has actually done this before. I was United States Attorney for 7 years in New Jersey in the immediate aftermath of September 11th. Brought two of the most major terrorism cases this country has brought in the aftermath of September 11th. And I know that what we did this summer was wrong. It was wrong at the time, and it's now being proven to have been wrong when we cut back on the NSA's metadata collection program and have been destroying the morale of our intelligence officers. We need to rebuild that program. We need to rebuild the morale of our intelligence. We need to support law enforcement, which this administration has not been doing. And the FBI director himself said there's a chill wind through law enforcement. We need to do all those things first and foremost, Jake, to protect the homeland, because the number one job of the President of the United States is to protect the safety and security of the American people. National security is not an option. It's a fundamental right, and that's what we'll be focused on.
Governor Chrstie, you said yesterday in New Hampshire that this...
Well, I don't think national security is really a right. Oh, and I've increased the light on my face here. I don't know, did that increase the resolution? You can let me know down in the comment section. But I want to move from New Jersey Governor Chrstie to another supposedly reasonable governor running for the Republican nomination for president. This is Ohio Governor John Kasich, who made a pretty anti-constitutional suggestion that should rub my atheist viewers the wrong way, I think. Not just the Muslims, but even the atheists should find this idea of creating like a Department of Judeo-Christian Values or something like that. That's kind of this ridiculous suggestion that he's walked back a little from, and he tries to explain it in terms of Western values and even including moderate Muslims, but still doesn't really make much sense. Well, you can tell me what you think after you watch him try to explain it over on Meet the Press, talking to Chuck Todd this morning over here.
Responses to the ISIS attack on Paris was Republican presidential candidate and Ohio Governor John Kasich's proposal to create a new government agency to promote, quote, Judeo-Christian values. It's now an idea he's amended a bit, and Governor Kasich joins me now. Governor Kasich, welcome back to Meet the Press. But I got to start with, when you say that phrase, we got to promote Judeo-Christian values around the world, particularly to the Middle East. In this atmosphere, it can come across as a little anti-Islam. Tell me why I'm wrong about that.
Well, Chuck, you need to calm down. What I have said is, when I look at Voice of America or Radio Liberty, what I've argued is the Western ethic. What is it about? It's about life. It's about equality of women. It's about the freedom of religion. It's not about going to church is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about that every life has real meaning. And as if you read more carefully, you would have noticed that I've invited moderate Muslims into this discussion as well. Now, I proposed some time ago a comprehensive plan to deal with ISIS, including boots on the ground, a coalition including Arabs, NATO forces, no-fly zones, sanctuaries, a lot of things. But I said we can win the battle of bullets. I have no doubt about that. But we have to also engage in the battle of ideas when we have many people, including many young people, looking for meaning in life somewhere other than in Western civilization. And I think it's the Western ethic, Western civilization that is under attack. They don't want to negotiate. This is almost a metaphysical battle where they're saying they want to destroy our very way of life. And I think it's important we communicate these ideas of the importance of an individual and equality of women and respect for education and respect for science. And we'll invite anybody in that wants to be part of that communication. And frankly, I am proud to see so many moderate Muslims beginning to stand up and condemn the attacks in Paris and to say that their religion has been hijacked. So I think it's very important that we all come to grips with the fact that we've got to communicate who we are. And while we believe in life, they believe that death somehow gets them to paradise. So not any new agency and not anything about going to church, about who we are as the West that represent freedom and life and progress. That's what we need to communicate to the world.
Now, one of the
Well, that seems like quite a switcheroo from the original quote or policy suggestion from Governor John Kasich about having some sort of Department of Judeo-Christian values that is really just about our Western values in favor of life and equality and whatever it was he said there. And by the way, I don't know if that light increased the resolution on my last commentary segment there, but it totally blinded me afterwards. I couldn't even see what I was doing in terms of producing the broadcast, so you won't be seeing that light again, however useful it was in that last segment. But I want to move on to the last couple clips on the Republican side of the race. That these are actually fairly entertaining, though in some ways kind of horrifying. The first one, not so much. These are the two Rush Limbaugh clips. Rush Limbaugh did an interview over on Fox News Sunday, and it seemed like they didn't even... he was treated as if he was just like a rational person and not like the purveyor of hate that he really is. If you listen to his show on any kind of regularity, which I used to especially when I lived in Missouri, and because he's from Cape Girardeau, and I used to do some more driving around for my job, and I used to listen to him when I was driving in the car at certain times, but I haven't listened to him regularly for a while. But he does represent a certain segment of the Republican Party, and he has, as Chris Wallace introduced him, I don't think I showed the introduction. No, maybe in the next clip I showed the introduction, but in this clip where Chris Wallace mentions he has 20 million viewers or listeners, many of whom are the Republican base. So what he thinks about the candidates is actually kind of important for the Republican primary process. And this first clip is Rush Limbaugh telling Chris Wallace his thoughts on the several of the Republican nominees, not John Kasich there, because I guess he's not high enough in the polls, but here's Rush Limbaugh's take on several of the possible frontrunners, I guess, over in this clip.
First of all, Donald Trump.
Donald Trump is, I think, doing a great service. He is showing that you do not have to fear attacks from the media. Republicans do not have to fear attacks from the media. He's showing you do not have to fear being politically correct or violating political correctness.
Ben Carson.
One of the most decent human beings in this country. One of the finest men. I've met him. The things that he's done, places he's come from, he's just one of the most decent human beings that I've ever met, and I cringe when I see that they are trying to destroy him. Yeah. Okay, next name.
Equipped to be president?
Ben Carson equipped to be president? Probably not at this stage, but any of these Republicans running would be better than Hillary or better than anything that we've got now. So based on that comparison, yes, I'd vote for him if it was up to me or up to him and Hillary. Absolutely, without a doubt.
Ted Cruz.
Well, brilliant, just absolutely brilliant, and conservative through and through, trustworthy, strong, confident leader, and somebody in whom you can totally depend.
Jeb Bush.
Jeb Bush. I don't think he really wants to do this. I'm watching, and I don't see passion. I don't see fire. It's as though people in his camp want him to do it because they want to get back in power. I just don't see Jeb with all that energy that says, I need this, the country needs me, I can't wait to do this. I just don't see any of that.
Finally, Hillary Clinton.
I just think corruption. When I think of the Clintons, I think corruption and skirting the edges. Don't trust them, and certainly don't think the country would be in the best hands possible if either of them got back in power.
Finally, you have put out another in your series of children's books. This one is called Rush, Revere, and the Star-Spangled Banner, in which you and your talking horse, Liberty, and some middle school students go back to talk to the Founding Fathers. And once again, it's a New York Times bestseller.
I couldn't resist keeping that little plug for Rush Limbaugh's kids' book at the end of his discussion of the presidential candidates. Chris Wallace spent a lot of time letting him plug his book about his time-traveling horse, how he goes with this time-traveling horse to talk to the Founding Fathers. And you'll see in this next clip that Chris Wallace mentions it in his introduction to Rush Limbaugh, and then he lets Rush Limbaugh talk about, in the introduction, Chris Wallace says, love him or hate him, he's the king of conservative radio, and then Rush Limbaugh talks about how he's not responsible, he's not a purveyor of hate, it's only the people who disagree with him who are responsible for the hate. And then without any irony at all, Chris Wallace plays this incredibly hateful song about Barack Hussein Obama, or Barack Hussein O, and the Syrians. And, well, you'll see for yourself, and I will discuss it a little more after you watch that clip over here.
First in the nation caucuses. Well, love him or hate him, Rush Limbaugh is the king of conservative talk radio. 20 million people listen to him each week on close to 600 stations across the country. He's also written a new children's book called Rush, Revere, and the Star-Spangled Banner. Rush Limbaugh joins us now from his EIB studios in Florida. And Rush, welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
Hey, it's great to be with you, Chris. It really is. And by the way, everybody listens to me, loves me. There is no hate. It's a great, great, great misnomer.
I know, but there's some people who don't listen to you. Those are the ones I was talking about. Anyway.
Oh, no. Even the ones who disagree, listen, they're the ones who hate, and they're the ones who need a reason for it each and every day, and I'm happy to provide it. Full service shop here, going into our 28th year. So I pinch myself each and every day I have the chance to do it, and it's a thrill to be here with you, as always.
Thank you for that. I want to start with a new song that you played on your show Friday from a group that you called Barack Hussein O and the Jihadi Singers. Here's a clip.
That's exactly right.
ISIS is just all right with me. ISIS has been contained, oh yeah. ISIS is just all right with me. ISIS the JV team.
You were rocking along as we were playing it. I know it's a parody, but I'm sure one with a point. What are you saying about President Obama's strategy toward ISIS?
I don't think...
I do not want to let you know what Rush Limbaugh thinks about President Obama's strategy towards ISIS. Not because I'm trying to hide it from you, but really, I just don't care. I only showed that clip because I couldn't believe that they played that little song clip about ISIS is just all right with me. You know, ISIS took the place of Jesus in that song. Can you imagine if a Democrat did a parody song where they put ISIS in the place of Jesus? I mean, what an attack on Christianity that is there. And, of course, you know, ISIS is just all right with me, and he uses the whole, like, containment line that I kind of debunked on the broadcast last week by showing the entire context of what Obama said about being the containment being geographical on the ground in Iraq and Syria. But anyway, I've given Rush Limbaugh probably more time than he deserves, except for the fact that he does have those 20 million conservative, although dwindling, it's a dwindling amount of listeners, but he does still have quite a number of listeners who vote in Republican primaries. So I guess I should show his anti-Obama Islamophobia. And I guess, so speaking of Islamophobia, the last few clips I want to show are all from HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher, where he ended this year. You know, he's coming back January 15th. This was the last show of the year. He ended it continuing his criticism of liberals for criticizing him for demonizing Islam and calling him Islamophobic. And I think that there are definitely a couple examples in the two clips I'm going to show that explain, that I will be able to use as reasons why he actually is Islamophobic, why he is not being fair to Islam in terms of its comparison to Judaism and Christianity. And anyway, this is the first clip I want to show. Is he talks specifically about liberals and how they're just used to Muslims in America. They don't know the real Muslims, basically. And I'll talk about that a little more after you watch that clip. Over here.
Because I think a lot of Americans are myopic about really every issue. So when they talk about Muslims, they think about American Muslims, which there are 6 million of. There's another 1.5 billion around the world, and to be an American Muslim is a pretty good deal. If you want to leave the religion, you can. It's sort of a boutique Muslim experience. And I would also say...
As is ISIS. ISIS is a sect of a sect of a sect. I mean, they're a boutique within Islam as well.
But just to finish on this for 1 second about American Muslims. Okay, I think that Islam is a problem. But I don't think American Muslims are the problem. That is not the squeaky wheel that needs the oil in this problem.
And
yes?
And that's not the reason why I think you see this opposition currently among the American people to bringing in these refugees. It's not because of xenophobia about Muslims. It's because they don't trust their government to be able to tell good ones from bad ones when you're bringing them in. Just think about this for a second. If you brought in 65,000 refugees, as Hillary Clinton wants to do, even if you're right 99.99% of the time, you've still got 6 guys who come in who have terrorist inclinations. You look what they just did with 8. Look what they just did with 10.
But you were just talking with Gavin Newsom about the visa waiver program, focusing all this attention we've had this week on the Syrian refugees, and I think it's a serious vetting situation, 18 to 24 months. Perhaps it should be even more serious given the instability of the region. But the real problem is the visa waiver program. You know how many entries there were to the United States last year under the visa waiver program? 20 million.
You mentioned that.
20 million. It's attacking the Syrian refugee problem and ignoring that is like attacking Brazil after Pearl Harbor. It's a vigorous response, but it's the wrong target.
I think we all agree on that. That's what I'm saying. It's not the squeaky wheel.
Yeah. And the squeaky wheel thing that Bill Maher said at the beginning and the end, you know, he's saying that the radical Muslims are the squeaky wheel that get the oil, but the thing is, what he doesn't really, I don't know, maybe it's some sort of like Freudian slip or something, but the basis of the cliche or the aphorism that it's the squeaky wheel that gets the oil. Well, you know, all wheels do need oil, but the squeaky wheel is the one that gets it first. But so it's kind of, I don't know, it's not the best example of Bill Maher demonizing all Muslims, but the fact that he used the squeaky wheel aphorism is him basically saying all Muslims need oil, but the squeaky Muslims are the ones who are getting it. Maybe he didn't mean it that way, but it's actually much more clear in this next clip where he specifically says that Islam is worse than Judaism and Christianity. It's the ideas are worse, and that, you know, that's the thing when I've been discussing this that I seem to get the most misunderstanding in the comments section, both as a live show and as a recorded show, which people think I'm saying Bill Maher is saying all Muslims are bad, which I know he sometimes says that they aren't, although he tries to I think maximize the number of Muslims who believe in bad ideas more than is really accurate, and using source material that isn't really that dispositive. But it's not just, he's not really saying all Muslims are bad, but he's saying Islam is a worse religion and has worse ideas than the other Abrahamic religions, Judaism and Christianity, when they basically all have a lot of militaristic, nasty stuff in them, and they also have some good, you know, humanistic ideas that respect human dignity. That you can find that in all 3 of the major Abrahamic religions, and that's Bill Maher's big mistake. I think that is the best evidence of his Islamophobia that is in this final clip I'm going to show from that discussion, although there'll be one more clip from the new rules that emphasizes the point even more. But here's this clip is fairly long. It's almost 4 minutes long, and it's that same discussion of whether liberals are too soft on Muslims in the Muslim world and too soft on the ideas, Muslims versus Islam versus Judaism and Christianity, over in this clip.
Let's not
I strongly
forget,
agree with that.
No, I saw this today in the news on TV. 56% of Americans believe that the Syrian refugees have odds that are at values, their values are at odds with our values. That may not be wrong. If you are in this religion, you probably do have values that are at odds. This is what liberals don't want to recognize. You may be from a country, as there are many, many Muslim countries that either have Sharia law or want Sharia law. Those values are not our values. Can I read what David Cameron said? He's the Prime Minister of Britain, as we know. He said, the root cause of the threat we face is the extremist ideology itself. Let's not forget our strongest weapon, our own liberal values. We believe in respecting different faiths, but also expecting these faiths to support the British way of life. Too often we have lacked the confidence to enforce our values for fear of causing offense. And then he talks about the horrors of forced marriage. He talks about how the utter brutality of female genital mutilation is too common in his country, nearly 4,000 cases, and that's just the reported cases, 11,000 cases of honor-based violence. I'm not saying this is going to happen in America, but this idea that somehow we do share values, that all religions are alike, is bullshit. And we need to call it bullshit.
No, I actually strongly disagree with that, Bill. I think that it is incredibly important, particularly now after the Paris attacks, particularly now with ISIL raging around the world, to stand up for real diversity and to say our diversity is our strength.
So keeping women as second-class citizens is just diversity?
I'm not saying that.
But you are saying that.
No, I'm not.
That's what it comes down to.
No, I'm not. What I'm saying is we in Canada are not going to say Muslims are worse than Christians or are worse than Jews or are worse than atheists.
The ideas are worse.
No, and their culture is not worse. And we also appreciate that ISIL does not represent Muslims. And it's now more important than ever to say that and to stand up for diversity.
Look, there's 1.5 billion Muslims. Surely we can agree that there is a portion of them, a portion that does number in the millions. If you take these Pew polls on the popularity of ISIS,
if it's 1/10 of 1%, it's 1.6 million.
The point, but in Turkey, it's 8%, and that's of a country of 75 million people. Let's assume that's the sake of argument. That's 6 million people.
You're saying 8%.
8%
of how many people?
Of 75 million.
I can't do math.
6.
Okay, 6 million people agree with ISIS, and you're telling me it's the same as our culture?
Our culture is a very diverse one, and I think now it is incredibly dangerous and very wrong to persecute Muslims and say there is something wrong with being a Muslim.
This is a leap.
Bill, I think Cameron's right. We've got to stand up for our values and not say that we're going to tolerate something that in our culture we don't accept. On the other hand, one of the tricks, one of the things that ISIS is up to is to try to get us to clamp down on all Muslims regardless of who they are, where they are, and push them into the ISIS camp. I had a Muslim girl, it was a foreign exchange student that lived in our house for a year, 4 years ago. She was the most peaceable soul in the world. She prayed 5 times a day. She didn't even know about September 11th, couldn't figure out why those guys would do such a thing. So I don't want to push her away.
But I don't think you push her away. Because this is just an elite piety, that there's no difference between these two things.
No, and you're right about that.
But just think of what you're saying.
Are you guys saying the Muslim faith is by definition worse than other people's
No, I'm saying that there's a difference between the radical...
The ideas. If 6 million people in a supposedly moderate country agree with ISIS, I read this article recently. It was attacking me about my beliefs on such things. And they said, oh, Bill, you paint with too broad a brush. What about Indonesia, the moderate country of Indonesia, which most of it perhaps is? And then they went on to say only 18% believe in honor killings.
Yes.
Really? So 1 out of 5 people in the country that you're holding up as the moderate country believes if a woman is raped, we blame and kill her?
Okay,
And the problem with Islam is...
You spend most of your show pointing out the dumbness of Americans. You know, if you look at opinion
dumbness
polls,
is a little
you
different
can
than...
always No, seriously. I mean, it is very, very wrong to demonize a religion.
I'm not demonizing. I'm just reporting. You are making it a demonization.
But the challenge...
Of course, I really do think Bill Maher is demonizing Islam in a lot of what he said there and saying it's worse than Judaism and Christianity. And I think that Canadian Minister of Parliament there, what's her name, Cynthia Freeland? I don't have her name exactly right, but it was kind of on the screen during the clip right there, but I wasn't. I was busy doing other stuff there. But the point I want to make is that what Bill Maher was saying about Islam being worse than Judaism and Christianity because the people in Indonesia or the people in certain Muslim countries have certain beliefs about women's rights or female genital mutilation. As I pointed out on previous programs, female genital mutilation is not required by Islam, and it's practiced by non-Muslims in some of those African countries. And one of the things I also realized that I personally think about that makes me question Bill Maher's conclusions. You know, he talks about how, American Muslims, they're like boutique Muslims. They're not real Muslims. Their interpretation of the religion of Islam isn't as, accurate as these Muslims in other countries who, are anti-homosexual and anti-women's rights and all these things that liberals should be against. But the thing Bill Maher never talks about when he talks about these public opinion polls is what percentage of the people in those same countries who aren't Muslim have those same views about, sexual politics or the role of women in society. And if you were to look at those polls, I think you would find that even the Christians, the Jews, the whatever, and this is where would have very similar views to the Muslims because it's their cultural views, not really religious views. And one of the pieces of evidence I wanted to point to in this regard is something I've learned over the last 20 years from my wife's family. My wife's family were Jews from Egypt. They were it's a special, they're called Karaite Jews, and they were Jews who lived in Egypt for many years. And I got to know these immigrants from Egypt who were Jewish over the last 20 years, and they actually had many of the same cultural beliefs as Muslims from Egypt also, about women and men and dating and very conservative views about homosexuality. They may not have been as radical as some of these radical Muslims in Egypt, but they did have a lot of the same cultural views as the Muslims in Egypt. And that is a piece of evidence for me, at least, that a lot of these views about women and about sex and about blasphemy and those are all things that are cultural, not really based in Islam. But the other point I wanted to make on that issue, or on the issue that the Minister of Parliament from Canada was it Cynthia Freeland? I think something very close to that was her name. I'm sure you can post it down in the comment section and correct me if I know I don't have it exactly right. But she was pointing out how Bill Maher also talks about the crazy beliefs of Christians in the United States, and that's something Bill Maher actually came back to in his New Rules segment after he showed Dr. Ben Carson in his picture with Jesus in a bathrobe behind him. He also talked about some other Republican politicians who have these crazy Christian beliefs that have a real negative impact on American politics that seems kind of at odds with him singling out Islam as being worse than Judaism or Christianity. And that's the last clip I want to show is from Bill Maher's New Rules segment for his last show of the year, where he talked about some crazy Christian beliefs from Republican politicians without really realizing he was showing that Islam isn't really that much crazier than any other religion, or isn't crazier in ways that hurt people in important ways, as I'll discuss after you watch that clip over here.
You know what my great disappointment is? That I live in a country where 4 out of 10 people believe we're living in end times, and that the stupid media never asks Jesus freaks running for office 2 questions. Do you believe the world is ending soon? And is that a bad thing? Because I'm the opposite of an end timer. I'm a spend timer. I want to spend as much time as I can on this planet. And I want some planet left for the children and grandchildren who are always kicking the back of my airplane seat. Politicians here love to talk about fundamental differences. This is as fundamental as it gets, folks. Lamar Smith is the chairman of the House Science Committee, and he's a Christian Scientist, which means he doesn't believe in science. He wants to repeal Obamacare and replace it with prayer. John Shimkus is chairman of the House Subcommittee on the Environment, and he says, don't worry about rising sea levels, because in the Bible, God promised Noah there won't be any more floods. So what if the oceans are dying and we kill all the fish? Christ can make more, he's done it before. No wonder nothing gets done in this country. How serious can people like this be about wanting to improve the future when they don't think we'll be around for it? A majority of evangelicals say Christ will either probably or definitely return to Earth by 2050, depending on his schedule. So why fix the streetlights if there's just going to be a big fight with Satan? Well, why reform health care? Why wear pants?
So I think Bill Maher pointed out a lot of reasons that crazy Christian beliefs here in the United States affect us negatively in our politics, especially amongst some right-wing conservative Republican politicians. And I think it undermines his previous argument about Islam being somehow crazier or more having a negative effect on us than the craziness of Islam is worse somehow than the craziness of Judaism or Christianity. And as I've argued over and over again, going back to a video I made when Saddam Hussein was executed called, I think it was Saddam Shows Worst of Judeo-Christian Islamic Tradition, I argued there that I think that people really bring their cultural and personal beliefs and biases, and they bring that to their religion, and then they take out of religion what they were looking for to begin with, and that has a lot to do with their culture and their family and their upbringing, and the 3 major Abrahamic religions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And I've read all 3 of the texts. Of course there's a lot of overlapping texts there, but I haven't read all the hadiths, but I have read the Quran and the Christian Bible and the Jewish Bible, and they all have some really nasty, militaristic, kill everybody who doesn't believe stuff in there, and they all have stuff about being, respecting every person's dignity and real humanistic values. You can find both, and so when you go into those texts, you can take out what you bring in as a person. That's my position, and you can disagree if you want. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section, and that's pretty much the show for tonight. I want to finish up. I apologize for some of the technical problems. Hopefully by next week I'll have the audio levels worked out a little better. Like I said, I had to add a whole bunch of new hardware. If you want to help me out, especially if this video doesn't end up being monetized like last week, because there's so much talk about ISIS and terrorism, and YouTube doesn't find that content to be advertiser friendly, supposedly, or that's all I can conclude from the fact that last week's video wasn't monetized. So if you want to help out, there's a link down to my Patreon page in the video description, or up here in the corner, you can click on this little eye and give a direct donation through fan funding. I hope you appreciate the 31 clips I picked out from the 5 corporate news media outlets, and from HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher, and that one from Saturday Night Live. Next week, there's not going to be any Saturday Night Live or Real Time, so we'll just have to find what political comedy there is in the regular news programming. And I think that Rush Limbaugh clip could have been political comedy for if we didn't have Bill Maher or Saturday Night Live to rely on. So we'll see what we can find next week. I should be back next week. I'm varying the time of the program every week, it seems, but it should be sometime around 6 p.m. Pacific time, which is now Greenwich Mean Time minus 8 hours. I may have time to put up some sort of edited, produced video. I think I may want to talk about the anti-circumvention provision in the Digital Millennium Copyright Act that means that if you use technology to circumvent this copyright protection on HDMI cables, even if you're not violating anyone's copyright, you're committing a felony if you profit financially from it, which means if my video was monetized, it would be profit. So anyway, look for that this week, and otherwise I'll see you next week for Liberal Viewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. And until then, I guess I'll be seeing you all around the internet.